distinction is democracy versus autocracy. In the UN, tensions simmer between the US and China China has the upper hand with support from the global south. McCarthy 23 finds that under the Belt and Road Initiative, China has invested over $1.5 trillion in more than 100 developing nations, primarily in the global south, to buy their support and create debt traps, so these developing countries are indebted to China. It also capitalizes on their colonial grievances to position itself as their champion and defender. Increasingly, these developing nations favor autocratic China over Western leadership. This is significant because the EIU finds that out of 193 UN member states, only 74 are democratic. Therefore, under the rule of one state, one vote, democratic states will be outvoted by an undemocratic majority led by China. By courting support from the global south, China leverages this imbalance to its advantage. According to Jevons 24, global south countries tend to vote alongside China at the multilateral level. Sarhan 22 reports Arab and African countries continue to stand firm behind China in key votes at the UN. An example of how China exploits this is the Human Rights Council, where 70% of the members are non-democracies, many with a long history of human rights abuses like Sudan, Somalia, and Kazakhstan. The UN Watch compared it to asking Al Capone to fight organized crime. With the Human Rights Council in its pocket, China has been able to avoid accountability despite committing genocide in Xinjiang, repression in Tibet, and imprisoning political dissidents in Hong Kong. O'Keefe 20 says China's goal is to create voting blocs to outvote the US in order to repurpose the UN to advance their own aims. What saves the democratic minority from the tyranny of a China-led majority is the P5 silence of the US, UK, and France. With their veto power, they can block resolutions hostile to their interests and protect their allies. The veto right is a critical tool of self-defense for democracies. Impacts. First, without the protection of the P5, democratic nations will likely stop providing financial support or withdraw from the UN. After all, it makes no sense for democratic nations to provide the bulk of the UN funding only to be marginalized. This will lead to the UN's collapse and stop all the benefits that it provides, like food aid to 91 million people, vaccines to nearly 1 billion children, peacekeeping missions that protect 71 million from war, famine, and persecution, and nuclear non-proliferation, which is an existential threat. Second, the 2.3 billion people living under democracies will suffer from a Security Council dominated by China, passing resolutions adverse to their interests. For example, the Security Council could pass resolutions requiring the US to stop selling arms to Taiwan, which would threaten the 24 million lives there. The final impact is increasing authoritarianism in developing countries. The declining influence of democracies would pave the way for a triumphant China, seeking to export its authoritarianism to developing countries. Shulman 21 finds that in a growing number of developing nations, China has helped the corrupt elites centralize their power by deploying Chinese surveillance technology and other resources to oppress their citizens. As these developing nations become more oppressive, human rights abuses will worsen, affecting the 6 billion people in the global south. Judge, the P5 status of the US, UK, and France is critical for the defense of democracies and human rights and must be preserved. Therefore, we are very proud to negate. Thank you.
Alright, so before I start, I'm going to just give some quick shout outs. So first, I need to give a shout out to my family. They're the ones who got me interested in the debate and provided me with the help and support whenever I needed it. Second, a thank you to my coaches in Bergen. They taught me all the fundamentals of debate. And I would be there.
Kaylin, search sharing screen.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. But also, thank you to my brother, who's always there at late nights doing drills with me and helping me fix my problems. Also, shout out to Aaron Troy for being a great friend and giving the best advice before round. And also finally to my partner, and if I wasn't for her, I wouldn't be debating here in the finals. Alright, if everybody's ready, I can start. Okay, so I'll start my time on my first word. Gia and I have never been prouder to affirm at the top prioritize our solvency for stable conflicts. Werner 20 furthers that Security Council veto power costs hundreds of thousands of lives, but reform could save millions. Contention 1 is Russian veto abuse. Russian veto power is devastating. Page 23 finds as long as Russia has veto power on the body, it will remain powerless. The P5 shouldn't be able to prevent UN from acting. Subpoint A is Yemen. Currently, the situation in Yemen is horrible. CPA 24 says that the humanitarian crisis has not improved. 21.6 million people need aid. The war has came down to Iran backed by Russia and Saudi Arabia backed by the US over Yemen. Russians veto stopped action. Newswires 18 continues that Russia vetoed a resolution that took aim at Iran over a report by UN experts that said the country violated an arms embargo, which set back our collective efforts to promote peace in Yemen. The reason the arms embargoes were important is because Russia vetoed for Iran, who's supplying weapons to the Houthi rebels. Family 24 furthers that Iran has given the Houthis ballistic missiles. The impact is to reduce conflict. Hugo Don 08 explained that arms embargoes can be effective in that they prevent unnecessary loss of lives. The lives lost in Yemen can be prevented once Russia loses its veto. Subpoint B is Syria. Right now, Syria remains one of the globe's largest humanitarian crises. CD Report 24 states that 17 million people will need humanitarian assistance across Syria, a 13% spike from last year alone. Unfortunately, Russian veto power denies this aid. Indeed, Proca 22 writes that the Russian has used its veto 17 times since 2011 alone to block the Council's efforts to protect the Syrian people. Gridlock prevents tangible solutions to materialize. Rabin Vash finds that Russian policy and rivalry with the U.S. in the Middle East was inaugurated by the outbreak of the Syrian revolt and civil war. A UN Security Council resolution that would have sanctioned international military intervention, as well as innovation of all efforts to reach a political situation. For example, the UN writes that Russia vetoed a draft solution that cut 85% of aid to the country. Only Russia stood in the way. A Syria proposed way forward, it was not a workable solution. The impact is large. UN 23 furthers, without a more balanced Security Council, the needs of the world's most vulnerable people will be compromised due to geopolitical rivals with access to the veto. Humanitarian needs in Syria are soaring, with 4.1 million people in need of aid. Intention 2 is Myanmar. Tensions in Myanmar are escalating as Myanmar's escalating conflict and worse violence since the military takeover in 2021. Cooperation between Myanmar and Russia is high. Story 23 finds that Myanmar has become the second most important country for Russia. Russia is the junta's preferred major power partner. Russia's veto allowed conflict to persist. ABC 24 finds that UN called for a unified international response to the escalating conflict. But Russia objected to the meeting, saying the country doesn't threaten international peace and security. The UN has been persistent to pass resolutions. UN 23 finds that members of the UNSC have condemned the unrelenting violence raging across Myanmar. 13 council members to end the violence and stop killing civilians. Nazima 24 finds that Myanmar's relationship with Russia is strengthening. The cooperation between Russia and Myanmar in military tech increased. There were 10 negotiations concerning the nuclear sector. Russia's and China's vetoes also have stopped any attempt at imposing embargoes. The Security Council has been largely silent on this situation. Regional efforts have been inadequate. China and Russia continue to block considerations of an embargo. Escalation is the key precursor to pro-lift. The junta was proactive in its attempt to secure nuclear capabilities by reaching out to China and Russia. And Myanmar concerns over the utilization of nuclear materials should carry weight for international security. Pro-lift spills over. As if Myanmar acquires nuclear capability, it will be a major disaster for South and Southeast Asia. The impact is twofold. First, its conflict as spillover is by far devastating. 18.6 million people who need humanitarian assistance, a 19-fold increase since February 2021. For all these reasons, my partner and I affirm.
Okay, cool. Crossfire?
Of course. Let me
Is everybody ready for cross? Okay.
Yes. Alright, you can go first question.
Sure, sorry, I was just taking a sip of water. Okay.
Okay.
Time starts now. Can I have the first question?
Of course.
Okay, so are you familiar with the concept of humanitarian intervention?
Sorry, can you say that again? There's like background noise.
Yeah, are you familiar with the concept of humanitarian intervention?
Can you just like quickly explain just so I can like be sure?
So basically, humanitarian intervention is a legal concept under international law that allows one or more countries without conditions on.
Yo, can
Spectators, please mute yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just go back a few seconds.
I paused prep. Not prep. Pause at 25 seconds, if that's fine.
Okay, can we just add a few seconds back? Cause
Oh yeah, that's
229 is what I cut.
okay, cool. We'll do 229.
229.
Okay, time starts now. So basically, humanitarian intervention is a legal concept under international law that allows any individual country to provide aid to another country. So my question for you is, under humanitarian intervention, couldn't any country have gone to provide aid to, for example, places like Syria or Yemen?
Okay, so I would say like maybe it was possible for like these other countries to provide aid, but I'll just tell you that like there's many cards we give you in case with like Syria and Yemen where they desperately need like UN aid specifically.
Why is UN aid specific, right? Why can't individual countries send aid? What's so specific about UN aid?
Okay, we tell you like when like all these members like group up, when they like send aid in total, they get like bigger packages, and then they
Do you
just
have
get.
any evidence for that? Do you have any evidence telling me that the UN aid is specific and we can't, individual countries, their aid doesn't work?
Okay, I'll just explain that like if these like countries give aid and like in total, then it would be better. Like.
Wait, I don't think you're understanding my question. So you're basically saying that individual countries can't send aid. Is that what you're saying?
I can just answer this, and my partner can just answer this. Is it okay if I take a question now?
Yeah.
Can you just like explain your solvency on your contention?
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, let me just go back up. Okay, so we tell you that in the status quo, democracies are the minority. Out of 193 UN member states, only 74 are democratic. Therefore, we tell you without the P5, everything would be under the rule of one state, one vote, and these democratic states would be outvoted every single time by an undemocratic majority led by China. Can I have a question?
Oh, wait, I just want to like be clarify. You're just saying like they won't be like voted as member states, right?
Sorry, could you clarify that?
You're just like saying that they wouldn't be able to like voted as members, right?
Not member specific. What I'm saying is that because autocratic nations dominate the UN, then these autocratic nations will continue to be voted onto the Security Council and then dominate the Security Council. Okay, can I have a question?
Yes.
All right. So in the status quo, isn't there a gate open in Syria that allows anybody to send aid?
I would tell you like, first like, could you like send the card after first, and also I'll tell you like this gate is probably not protected by the UN, which like, these
Okay,
are.
so do you know if the UN is currently sending aid to Syria or not?
No.
Okay, well, I would disagree with that. I would say that the UN actually in the status quo is already sending aid because there's literally a gate open in Syria that allows for aid. Okay, you can have a question.
I believe in 5 seconds. Yeah.
All right, good cross.
All right, that's all the prep we're going to be using.
220 is what remains.
All right, sure. Yeah. All right. By the time we get in 3, 2, 1. The key thing to remember is we're not saying reality is perfect as is, but it'll be far worse when you end up affirming, which is why you do not want to see that future materialize. Let's go down the affirmative. First, on Russian veto abuse. Subpoint A, Yemen. They tell you that currently Russia vetoed an embargo, which caused the conflict to continue. First, under right to protect and humanitarian intervention, it allows countries to act on their own individually. This means that it does not matter what the UNSC passes, countries can still act individually. But second, they did pass an embargo in 2022, which did last till 2023, showing that under current leadership of P5 membership, we've already been able to pass these. But third, UN aid is not specific because countries can still group up regardless. So it does not matter whether it's coming from the UNSC or not. If countries can still group up because the aid is still coming from the root source of countries, UNSC is not specific. Let's go into subpoint B, Syria. First, while they argue that Russia is refusing to send aid to Syria, preventing that region from stopping the conflict, this is false. This is false. The UNGA allocated $20 million to Syria, and Syria opened a gate 2 days after the Russian veto. My opponents clearly do not fact-check their history because the important thing to remember right now is we still send aid regardless of the UNSC or not. But second, this is non-unique. While it may be easy to point the finger at veto power for causing aid to not be sent, this is false. If countries wanted to send aid to Syria, they could regardless under humanitarian intervention and right to protect. Third, they have no guarantee of solvency, and you want to turn this. Because sometimes when the UNSC intervenes, it can actually be a problem. The UN pressed fines in 2019 when Turkey tried to intervene and ended up exacerbating the conflict and put in the danger and well-being of the area's 3 million residents and adding nearly 180,000 people to flee the border of Syria. So you cannot say that military confrontation would actually improve. But fourth, third, my opponent mentioned how Russia, one of the 2 autocratic members of the P5, abused their veto power. We'll just see more and more of this happen when you end up affirming because China and autocratic nations will take in the power gap and outvote democracies every single time. Now let's go on to their second contention of Myanmar. They have no solvency. On December 22nd, the United Nations Council demanded an immediate end to violence in Myanmar. The resolution passed, but military Myanmar did not follow this. This proves you cannot trust the solvency of my opponents in actually fixing the crisis. But second, under right to protect the humanitarian intervention, countries can still do this regardless. Now on to explaining our contentions. The first thing we tell you is that China has bought the support of autocratic nations. Democratic nations are the minority and autocracies are the majority. What happens when you end up affirming? You see an autocratic-led P5 where the U.S. leaves. This has happened multiple times before, like in the UN Human Rights Council and UNESCO, where after it was a majority vote, smaller autocratic nations were put on the same level as larger democratic superpowers, which led these countries to get outvoted because democracies are the minorities. The problem here is in both examples in UNESCO and the UN Human Rights Council, the U.S. left both times. This ended up causing more of a problem for those councils and made them counterintuitive. Turn my opponent's entire case because all of their examples are autocratic nations. I mean, we can get them onto our side because we'll see and we pre-precedent that no resolution will be passed under an autocratic-led UNSC and will lead to the fall of the UN because democratic nations are what uphold the peace. Autocracies are what downgrade it. Look exactly to my opponent's arguments. So take all their impacts plus our 6 billion lives from a UN collapse, and for these reasons, I strongly urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
So that was my prep. On my end, it says I took 31 seconds. Does that align with everyone else's?
2:22 is what I have left for you.
Okay. All right, and before I start, I also want to give a thank you speech. I've never made it this far in a round before. And so I want to thank my parents because they're, of course, the ones who got me into debate. All my coaches, Hannah, Spencer, Brooklyn, a.k.a. Bruce, Ceci, David, my lifelong debate girlies, Casey and Kira, and I just appreciated all the help and guidance everyone's given me over the past few months. And without further ado, I'm just going to go our case, their case. All right. Time starts. Now, Judge, to make a few responses to our case, first, let me tell you why they don't stand. On Syria, they say that we're still sending aid. Well, it's obviously not enough if the war's still going on, if 4 million people still need aid. They say that other people are sending aid besides the Security Council. We tell you the Security Council is key. On Myanmar, they say that the resolution is not about proliferation. It's actually, we're telling you that it's about conflict. The reason it doesn't work is because Russia tries to curtail any attempt of a UN resolution with P5 sovereignty. Our link is arms embargoes and weaponry, not stopping conflict. We tell you that right now 18.6 million people are suffering after the ceasefire. An arms embargo is needed. Now, let's go on their case. First, on their sole contention. They talk about debt traps. We tell you that debt traps are going to happen in either world because China's already in debt trapping as of right now, meaning that even if we affirm, they give you no specific evidence or reason to say that what's going to suddenly increase or if it's going to be worse. We turn this because debt trap diplomacy is not real because the Chinese Belt and Road invasion in the African continent is another stereotype that has to be debunked. China has built large infrastructure projects such as 16 African countries by creating 25 economic and trade cooperation zones. Africa is not currently facing a massive Chinese debt trap. African countries are eager to establish their identity and are not looking for charity anymore. Rather, it seems they are happy to be treated as trade partners. But if you still don't buy that, BRI has a warrant. We tell you that BRI solves global refugee crises. The UNCHR 2018 says that BRI helps with global refugee work. The BRI links humanitarian development aid to better address long-term problems and seek solutions to refugee crisis. Now, let's go on their funding link. First, we tell you that they have no link because geopolitics actually prevent cuts. Cuts to the UN would result in the US losing its veto in the General Assembly. Next, we also turn this argument towards our side because lack of reform causes the G4 to cut funding. Shordia 24 says that India cut its contribution to the UN by more than 50%. Myth that the UNSC is unwilling to reform. India's stance isn't isolated. Japan, Germany, and Brazil share similar frustrations. Spitzer 24 corroborates that in 2023, the UN received 40% of its donations requested, down from 68% the year before. This year, the gulf between needs and donors could be especially large. Next, we're also going to turn this because with permanent membership abolished, countries will actually earn their spot through aid. Reisenberg 19 finds that countries further their chances of winning a temporary seat by increasing foreign aid to poor countries. Prefer us on the probability because the UNSC remains an important component of international geopolitics with or without veto power. P5 states can't afford to jeopardize international influence by disavowing it. Now let's go on their food aid impact. We tell you their impact is severely overblown because Wills King 19 says that international humanitarian assistance comprises as little as 1% of resource flows to countries affected by humanitarian crises. Other resources include help raised by crisis-affected individuals and communities themselves. And now on their human rights impact, we tell you to turn this impact towards us because veto power is comparably worse for human rights, fueling terrorism across the entire continent of Africa. Koenig 21 says that African members of the Security Council have sought approval for counterterrorism funding since 2015, but the United States has not been willing to take that step, threatening to veto a resolution in 2018. As a result, we tell you that efforts have crumbled because Al Jazeera 2017 says that the two remaining members of West Africa's counterterrorism group said that they were dissolving anti-rebel grouping after the other three founding countries left. Next, they also tell you that the G15 are autocratic. We tell you that this is not true. And also on Dare 24 concludes that the African continent now accounts for almost half the terrorist attacks worldwide, and thus we strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
All right, Ross.
Yep. Would you like to ask first question?
Yes.
Perfect. Just let me know if you're starting.
Time starts now. So when the United Nations did pass a resolution to stop all violence in Myanmar, the conflict is still ongoing now. So how can we guarantee that under new leadership, a resolution would actually work if the military can just deny any UNSC resolution?
Because basically what we're telling you is that, what we're telling you is that arms embargoes are crucial, and the reason why we need to take out permanent membership is because Russia continuously vetoes these embargoes.
I don't know, but when we did pass a resolution on Myanmar, the military just did not comply at all and continued their violent actions, right? The resolution was to stop violent actions. The military continued to do so. So how can we guarantee that even in the affirmative world, these resolutions can be passed, and will the military will actually cooperate with them?
Because we tell you the military has no choice but to support the ceasefire.
Then why is it that when we did pass a resolution, they didn't follow it? If they have no choice not to, then why did they not follow it?
Well, first we would say that we're talking about the most recent resolution, and that the most recent resolution...
Yeah, but we have to look at what happens when we do pass these resolutions in the region, right? What we see is that when we do pass the resolutions, if the militaries don't comply, then how can we know that in your world we're actually solving for the problem, rather than just seeing a repeat of a resolution that got passed, but the military didn't follow?
The only reason the military didn't comply is because they had no choice. But once again, we're telling you that Russia vetoed the most recent resolution, and we could potentially save this by...
how do we know that resolution was going to work?
Because we tell you it's a higher probability since they fixed the issues in the last one. Can I ask a question now?
Sure.
Okay, so this is on your... Sorry, real quick. This is on your... I believe it's your... on your second impact, how would you solve for it?
Okay, wait, is it the one on stability?
Yes.
Okay, so like we tell you, when you remove democracies, we look at your exact case, right? All examples of autocratic countries supporting and fueling these territorial aggressions, right? We tell you it will create more political...
The countries that you gave the example of, they aren't autocratic.
Russia and China are the...
Okay.
Russia's... Right? We tell you that we'll see more territorial aggressions like China did in the South China Sea because it's just going to expand its range because nothing's stopping them. There's no veto to put them in check. We've seen this happen before where they go counterclockwise like in the UN Human Rights Council. Can I take a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so onto your Syria argument, right? If they still open the gate and the UN sends $20 million of aid regardless of a UNSC veto, then how is the UNSC unique, right? Because there are other forms of the UN that can already send aid. So why is the UNSC specifically unique?
The sending aid?
Mm-hmm.
We tell you that any amount of aid is good because right now 4 million...
Yes, we sent $20 million of aid already.
Real quick. 4 million people still need aid, so obviously the aid that's being given right now isn't enough, so the more aid we have, the better it is for these people, and I believe that's cross. Alright, cool. So just judges really quickly as a brief off-time roadmap is just going to be frontlining, then I'm going to go to blocks, and then lastly I'm going to go on to win. Is everyone ready? Cool. Time starts now. First, App argues that debt traps would happen in either world, but they misunderstand our contention. We understand that debt traps would happen in either world, but when you abolish permanent membership, all the support that China has gained from these debt traps will be used to outvote the democratic nations in the UN Security Council. Next, App argues that BRI is a myth because Africa is not looking for charity. This is false. Our evidence specifically tells you that the global South countries that receive money from China tend to vote alongside them in the Security Council. The VRA is for the purpose of buying votes. Next, Af argues that democratic nations would stay in the UN to provide aid. However, the logic is simple. When you provide the money but your voice isn't heard, you'll leave. It makes no sense for democratic nations to provide the bulk of the UN funding only to be marginalized. We automatically win this point because we give you a historical example of the Human Rights Council. When the US and its allies were outvoted, they left. Next, let's go to blocks. First, they argue that Russia vetoed intervention in Myanmar, Syria, and Yemen. First, understand that under the doctrine of humanitarian intervention, nothing stops the rest of the world to work together to stop the atrocities my opponent mentioned, but they didn't. It may be politically convenient to point the finger at the veto power for their own failure to act, but that is just hypocritical. They claim that humanitarian intervention is not enough, but they never explain how UN aid specifically would solve this issue. Also, Syria is not an example supporting AF. The Syrian government actually reopened the crossing 2 days after the Russian veto, and the UN continued to deliver aid to Syria. They claim that aid is not enough because the war hasn't stopped, but they never explain to you. But aid will never solve a conflict single-handedly. It will only help the citizens. Even UN aid specifically will not stop the war. Aid never stops the war. It only helps the citizens. Next, on their point about Myanmar. First, remember that we actually passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Myanmar, and it failed. This proves that ceasefires only delay the problem, they don't solve them. They also give you no evidence that this time specifically a ceasefire resolution in Myanmar would work. Furthermore, there have been nearly 500 conflicts since 1945. UN has no standing military and limited resources. It's unfair for us to cherry pick some conflicts as a reason to abolish the P5 as a whole. And finally, we turn this. China and Russia constantly veto against UN actions against human rights abuse around the world. A Security Council dominated by autocratic nations like China and Russia would be less likely to intervene in human rights abuses and atrocities. Finally, let's go into weighing. We win on magnitude. AF's impacts are only limited to tens of millions of lives, whereas our impacts are bigger. We tell you that if you abolish the P5, it would cut off food aid to 91 million people, vaccines for 1 billion children, peacekeeping for 71 million. It will also hurt the 2.3 billion people living under democracies and the 6 billion people in developing nations. We also win on probability. AF never tells you how likely their impacts are, whereas we do. Our impacts are likely because they've already happened before in the Human Rights Council and UNESCO. Therefore, judges, if you truly care about saving lives and helping the people, please vote nay. Thank you.
So, I believe we still have 2 minutes and 15 seconds left of prep.
222 is what remains.
Oh, sorry.
I took 136 at prep.
45 is what remains.
Okay. Is everybody ready? Yes. I'll start time on my first word. Judge, let's start on our side. They lose the round when they concede our entire case. Extend Myanmar. Myanmar has faced alarming spillover by the 2021 coup. Edith 24 tells you that Russia and China allows escalation to continue by blocking arms embargoes. Bizima 24 tells you that the Russia and Myanmar are working together to build nuclear tech. That exacerbates the risk of proliferation. Extend our impact tells you that a 19-fold increase has happened and 18.16 million people are in need of aid. And extend our nuclear war, we tell you 1.1 billion people may die. The effects are catastrophic. First, we're going to frontline. At the top, they drop a 1 in 20 card, which states that the veto has cost hundreds of lives and reform would save millions. You should buy this card over anything in this round because it's the solvency in this round. This goes completely uncontested. Next, on Myanmar, they only talk about resolutions about ceasefires, not arms embargoes. But anyways, I'll tell you two things. First, we tell you that Myanmar's military refuses has no choice but to support the ceasefire. That's because Russia vetoed the most recent one, prefer the most recent evidence over anything else in the round because we give you real-world examples in the status quo. Second, we tell you the resolution they talk about is not about prolif, it's about conflict. The reason it doesn't work is because Russia tries to curtail any attempt of a UN resolution without the P5 sovereignty. Our link is arms embargoes and not weaponry, not stopping conflict. We tell you that right now, 18.6 million people are suffering after the ceasefire. But an arms embargo is needed. They also concede that Russia and China are the only autocratic countries in the second class. We win our side, that's the first strike. Now going on to the comparative debate, our case outweighs based on magnitude and severity, realize that nuclear war is the biggest impact in the round and kills far more than their impact on autocracy. Moreover, nuclear war would create radiation and firestorms that engulf the entire world, which outweighs on scope because that BRI is only located in one specific part of the world. Furthermore, nuclear war would also short-circuit the case because it would devastate democracies around the world and destroy their ability to contain autocracies. Nuclear war would also outweigh on time frame because it happens immediately and creates mass devastation very, very quickly. You should disregard the probability argument because the sheer magnitude of a nuclear war is so much bigger, which offsets probability. We win the comparative, that's the second strike. Now going on to their side, on the top, you should drop them because on a technical level, they don't even extend their case. But anyways, we tell you on debt traps, once again, we tell you that they would exist in both worlds. Next, on BRIs, we tell you that Africa prefers to be an equal trade partner and they enjoy this. They don't want charity. They're not going to be voting for China. Next, on funding, they dropped 2 turns. First is the Weinsberg, 19 turns that countries further the chance of winning a temporary seat by increasing foreign aid to poorer countries. And the second turn that finds that lack of reform actually causes G4 to cut funding. And finally, on food aid, they lose access to the case that 3 strikes. We knock them out of the park. As you know, Joseph, if there's 3 strikes, you're out. And for all these reasons,
Okay, time starts now. Can we have the first question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so let's go to this point about embargoes and aid, right? If there was a Security Council dominated by autocratic nations like China and Russia, wouldn't you mean that they would actually be less likely to pass any sort of aid or embargoes to these countries, considering that they were the ones who vetoed it in the first place?
Sorry, could you rephrase that?
Yeah. So you give me this argument that China and Russia are vetoing aid and embargoes, right? But in a world where China and Russia dominate the Security Council, wouldn't you read that they'd actually be less likely to adopt resolutions about embargoes or aid, considering that they were the ones that vetoed it in the first place?
Can you elaborate on how they would be dominating the P5 as if they are still in the dominating the Security Council? Because if they are still on the Security Council, they would have to be voted, and it would be a non-temporary seat, meaning they don't still have their veto power.
Yeah. So I understand that it's not a permanent seat. That's the whole point about them not being permanent members. But because the General Assembly votes on who's going to be in the Security Council, China and Russia, because autocratic nations are the majority, autocratic nations are going to be voted onto the Security Council and dominate the democratic nations.
But that's what I'm asking you. How would they dominate? Are you saying that they're going to buy countries over? Or are you saying that they're just going to
So
force?
like we've seen before with historical examples, right? In majority vote scenarios, there are more autocratic countries than democratic countries. That's the first way. The second way is through the BRI, where China has already set up debt traps, but even when countries revive from them, they still back them up, like we've seen in Africa in the UN. So they start to back up China and vote them in. But third, we tell you that China pushes its agenda onto other countries and is continuing BRI, meaning that more countries will end up joining its side. All right, can we take so you guys can take a question.
Thank you. So this is on this is on your case. So you talk about how sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. This is on your funding. Why do you think the P5 would stop funding?
Yeah. So for a few reasons. One, we tell you that logically it just doesn't make sense. Logically it just doesn't make sense. Right? Democratic nations wouldn't provide the bulk of the UN funding only to be marginalized and not have their voices heard. We've already seen this happen with the Human Rights Council, right? Where they were constantly outvoted by these autocratic nations and they withdrew their participation and funding. Okay, can we have a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so let's go to your point about Syria, right? You claim that currently our current aid is not enough. But then if the UN Security Council is currently sending aid in the status quo, are you basically saying that the UN aid is not enough?
So there's a difference. The UN is sending aid, but the Security Council isn't sending aid because Russia vetoed. And
The Security Council is part of the UN.
I know that, but still,
But why does the Security Council aid? Okay, why is Security Council aid very specific over individual countries' aid or the GA's or the General Assembly's aid? Right? You can't explain that.
Actually, once again, as I said in the last crossfire, the more aid we have, it's better because once again, 4 million people still need aid. So obviously, the aid that we have now is not enough. So by increasing the aid, we would be able to help more people.
Well, I would argue that in a Security Council dominated by nations like China and Russia, we would never vote to have any more aid. Okay, that's cross.
As a brief Octane roadmap, it's going to be the 2 key voters in today's debate, and then it's going to be weighing. All right, my time will start in 3, 2, 1. The first and most important voting issue in today's debate is democracy versus autocracy. My opponents have never gone directly against our link chain or anything similar. First, remember that Africa votes for China in the UN. This has been proven historically. They may not be part of the BRI right now, but they were still influenced it. But the second thing to remember is we've seen this happen before in historic Olympics, like UNESCO and the UN Human Rights Council. Both, when smaller autocratic countries were put on the playing same for democracies, they outweighed because first they were the majority, and second they legionized behind China, and China bought their votes in. But the third thing to remember is the U.S. left in both these situations. They dropped both of these historical examples and never responded to them, which is why I want to push them forward, because the U.S. left multiple times, showing that if this happens in the UNSC, it's going to be crucial. But the third thing you want to but the third thing you want to remember is that this impact is detrimental because it's 6 billion lives, but on top of that, it could collapse the UN entirely because it's no longer promoting peace and security, and rather increasing conflicts. They also dropped the turn on their entire case about this contention, so flow that through the round and have that on your weighing mechanism. Now let's get to the second key voting issue, which is veto abuse. They dropped their turn that autocracies are not going to let arm embargoes pass. Even then, they do not have solvency. They dropped the fact that on December 22nd, when the United Nations demanded an immediate end to violence in Myanmar, the military did not comply. They have no reason to show that these resolutions would actually pass and be solved in the first place. They only use simple logic, but logic cannot explain this. They also did pass an embargo. In Yemen in 2022. They dropped that as well. And Syria is already getting aid. They said the aid's not enough. We tell you that under humanitarian intervention, which when dropped, countries can still send them individually, not just by the UN. They also dropped our turn on their entire case, which wants you to move it onto our side of the flow. Do not weigh it. Finally, let's go on to weighing. We outweigh on magnitude. While we already have their case, we also want to tell you about magnitude because the UN collapse will be detrimental and outweigh even the largest of their impacts. But second, we have outweigh on probability because their impacts have happened before in multiple parts of the UN, where the US ended up leaving multiple times. Do not let them respond to this anymore. For these reasons, I strongly urge you to vote on the side that saves more lives, saves more money, and vote for Nick. Thank you.
45 is what remains.
Perfect. I'm just going to take that now. So I'm just going to go weighing our case and their case. Oh wait, sorry. Weighing their case, our case. Time starts now. Judge, my opponents are trying to muddle up the round, but in the end, an app ballot is the clearest route for you. Start on the weighing. The second they have conceded that nuclear war outweighs, they have lost this debate. They've conceded that nuclear war is the biggest impact in this round, which kills billions around the world, not just in BRA regions, almost immediately. We are winning the time frame debate. They've also conceded that nuclear war short circuits their case because it would devastate democratic countries' ability to contain our... You should disregard the probability arguments because sheer magnitude of nuclear war is so much bigger, which offsets probability. They have also not explained why just because something happened in the past, it's more likely to happen in the future. At this point, if you believe we are winning and any risk into our argument on the nuclear ballot, the round is over. Now on their case. They make the biggest mistake in the round when they forget to extend their case in first summary and again in final focus. You can never vote for them as they have no link or impact to even vote off of. Sign your ballot on funding. Remember, they dropped two key terms. First, we tell you that with permanent member abolished, countries will earn their spot through aid. That straight terms are linked because countries will actually end up giving so much more aid. And the second term was that lack of reform actually would cause the G4 to cut funding. They will cut funding if we don't reform the Security Council by removing permanent membership. These are really important because in their world, we see less funding. They can see this link that their world is going to be worse. Even if you buy their argument, we solve better. On autocracy, we would say that they can see that China and Russia are the only autocratic governments. Now on Myanmar, that means the only place you can vote is on our case. First, on Myanmar, we tell you that Myanmar has faced alarming spillover by the 2021 coup. EDA 24 tells you that Russia and China allow escalation to continue by blocking arms embargoes. And Mazima 24 even tells you that Russia and Myanmar are working together to build nuclear tech. That exacerbates the risk of proliferation, extending nuclear war where 1.1 billion people may die. Their effects are catastrophic. Once again, let's defend their case. They extend one response, which is that the P5 already passed in Myanmar. They literally dropped the fact that we posted their evidence. And once again, Judge, our Warner 20 card goes cleanly conceded. It tells you that reform would save millions of lives. This is the only solvency you have to vote on in the round, and thus we strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Great round, guys.
Great
Great round, judges.
Great round. Two judges.
You voted? All right. That means I'm going to pull the ballot at this point in time. All right. This was a unanimous decision on this panel. Congratulations to Brooks Debate Institute for placing first. All right, gonna open the floor up to as far as my adjudication panel for remarks.
I guess I'll go first because I have the feeling that you two are going to go much more in depth than I will. What it came down to for me is that Khan had more offense on the pro, and the pro didn't do enough to dismantle the narrative that the neg put together, showing democracies leaving the UN, being replaced with Chinese-led autocracies. And there's a lot of misrepresentation that goes on, I feel like, in the neg representation of how things work. Like, that's not how the BRI works, that's not how development works. But this is never really challenged by the AF. And so I have to buy the narrative that the neg is selling me. What's the other point? The other problem was Myanmar. Specifically Myanmar going nuclear. I felt like the AF could never quite answer how do you guarantee that things will work when you see an embargo passed that fails. And I understand that there was evidence that post-dated, but that's still a failure. It still happened. And so if that could fail in the status quo, like, I can't buy that it's not just going to happen in both worlds, which just takes it off your table. But yeah, that's where I came down. Both teams did a spectacular job. Congratulations, everybody.
Judge Moyer. Thank you, Judge Nicole.
Yeah, I think both, I mean, there were some, could have been round-winning comments or observations that were passed up multiple times in this debate. And I was waiting in several times for, one team to bring up, like, a simple fact. Like, here's an example. A lot of Khan's case rests on democracies being a minority in the UN. Yes, if you use several of the measures that, several of the democracy measures that are more popular, democracies are not a majority, but neither are autocracies. If I remember correctly, autocracies are something like 39%, and the other is split up between partial democracies and democracies. So I was waiting for Pro to bring something like that up, because that would undermine a whole lot of the Khan case, but it wasn't, and I can't vote on something that isn't brought up. Similarly, Pro, when you guys talk about, where is it? Okay, so, no, never mind. Misread that one. Yeah, but I mean, it came down to, it was a pretty tight round except for some of the missed opportunities. And I thought that, Khan, you carried the Human Rights Council, U.S. and allies leading it when they saw non-democratic nations taking it over. And even though I don't think that's what would happen if the council was abolished, you gave me a compelling narrative, and I've got to vote for that in the absence of a compelling narrative from the Pro team. So that's what it came down to for me.
Okay. For me, again, I feel it was as far as the AF did not engage properly in terms of the argument with the BRI. They set up the inherency on there as far as here's where China has bought the power or continues to buy or perpetuate the structure of power, whether it's debt trapped or not. I think a little bit more extensions on like from Brooks in terms of like, here is where the supply chain rests. On top of it, even if you wanted to really go there and push the magnitude of the severity of how China dependent we are, that I think would have really, really solidified a very clear, bright line for as far as going into a BRI. A couple of things that y'all don't know about the BRI. I know that AF tried to spin it and flip it, but the thing is that with the BRI, it does not provide localized economies. What they do is China actually brings their workers over and ships them over into those countries, and they set up neocolonialization. So when, as far as the second half of debate, when AF tried to flip it and say, oh, BRI good, that was like really, really, to me, something knowing that I've done so many arguments on the Belt Road Initiative that it really isn't there. Another thing, on rhetoric matters in terms of emotionally moving your ballot for the judge. At the point that you make things conditional of may or can or possibly without proving a clear line of probability, then I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to do the work to buy that. Again, solvency as far as does not rest upon conditional arguments. At the point that the affirmative tells me, and I think it was haphazardly thrown into the impact scenario, that y'all threw everything, didn't know how to engage with the Belt Road Initiative because they kind of pre-wrecked everything at that point in time. And the more that you push your offense on Myanmar and everything else, that pushed the offense of the neg, right? That's extremely very good in terms of case building and strategic, but also as far as when I take a look at this, oh my God, I just lost myself in the flow. The magnitude in which you say that you just went for nuke war impacts as a last minute, let me toss something up at the wall and hopefully it sticks. And it felt very much an afterthought in terms of the impact debate, because you say only 1.1 billion may die. At the point that I have something that may die comparatively with Brooks Debate Institute telling me this has already happened, a China fill-in happens when U.S. pullout happens, it's already empirics at that point in time. I'm always going to weigh empirics, and that's something Brooks Debate Institute, you need to change your rhetoric and say empirics already prove, right? And therefore, this is the reason why you outweigh this impact versus their conditional impact. You're always going to prefer the neg on that, right? So it's a matter of shifting your rhetoric and how you weigh things. But otherwise, it was a very clean vote for me in terms of the Belt Road Initiative that kind of preempted everything.
Thank you for judging. And also,
Thanks so much, judges. This was a great round, guys.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
I think Bergen did a good job refuting their points.
I think Potomac LP would have won, but that's just my own opinion. Hey, yo,
Potomac LP should have won.
Yeah,
I think that Potomac HC should have won.
We were gonna push everything against
CH.
I think Hawk Independent CC should have won because they ran theory.
Boy, get your ass out of here.
Oh, hell no, bro. Sebastian on top. Bro, Sebastian's ass.
Sebastian's awesome.
Yeah, bro.
How you join
All he does is red theory and loses
on middle schoolers, that's crazy.
Alright, can I give my RFD next? Alright, so I voted AF.
Everyone give Anthony Lee's
Okay, so I voted neg. I voted on a risk of solvency. I thought the affirmative wasn't handling the internal linkage to the BRI well. So I have to vote on a risk of solvency. Otherwise, I really just can't do anything about the neg case. So I think I vote neg.
If Bergen just kind of sucks.
Bergen Burgers.
I also voted on Zapatron.
This has to be the worst tournament ever.
Okay, I think even Stanford was better than this.
I think I'd rather go to a local tournament.
Low key,
Wait, who's the team that won Bergen CL and MS2C Octofinals?
Wait, who is this? Matthew Kwong?
Ave Hurricane.
Potomac CH and Potomac LY. Or not LY, LP should have coached him. Yeah.
Potomac
The team that
AK 101.
lost Bergen.
Whoever just said that.
KKK.
Cheeks.
I'm kidding. Potomac
Guys,
LP 101.
Guys, this meeting's being recorded. We're all cooked in. Guys, I don't think Travis can hold us.
Wait, that's not me. That's my little brother. It was on my left computer.
That was my stepsister.
Did I get a number?
I'm currently contacting Coach Han to spell tap. Yeah, because all you Bergen kids, you know, like get your prep done for you and you can't prep on the circuit.